I am in. All right. I will trust that none of you are still in your MTV mode, or PBS, or NBC. Because here we go. There's power to all, is power to none. You already heard that. We slipped it in. Or, to put it another way, the revolution. Let's present the revolution as the ultimate, though secret, tyranny. Now, if you can, my little joke about getting away from PBS, ordinary thought, I suspect that this could prove to be somewhat viscid to those of you who have gluteus in your neural cavities. But come with us to those thrilling days of never year that have yet to be. Another chilling journey into a neural landscape wherein 3. Well, I assume you understand. It's tricky when you try to do something, when you try to do a dramatic piece to go along with it. And then, of course, you got to look at it from the other side, and so I have to turn around and make sure. But anyway, it's 3, like 1, 2, 3. To this chilling neural landscape, wherein everything means what it means times 5. That was 1. And where also that everything can mean just what it means less what you think it means. And then the third one is where everything means what you believed it meant until we turned it inside out in a Klein bottle. You got all that? And we're talking about simultaneous here, which is really interesting in the 3D world because simultaneous means at the same time. Because, see, this is the only place where that can work, which is what makes it so interesting and so bone-chilling for those who have that kind of calcium deposit inside of your cranial area along with the gluteus. Of course, those of you who are larger with your maximus also. But here it goes. If you got all that, now we can proceed. We're talking about power to all is power to none. All right, for the execution of any sort of real new thinking, to actually start processing energy in a new, you have to do this, in a new place. And of course, nobody knows what that is. There's not anybody listening that doesn't know what it is. The only thing you can do is imagine. And so we're going to talk about it. I'm going to suggest you could take as a metaphor, that if you were going to actually ignite operationally a new site inside of your own brain, a place from which to think anew, truly anew, what you would have to do is have a soul center source of power. To take the Kyroots the way it first started, without any explanation as it was originally given, as power to all is power to none, if we were going to jump back out into Disney World, ordinary life, would you understand, taken at the broadest political base, with no preference, making no comment on the forms of government, but you simply understand that from the position of exercising power, if you give power to everybody, there is actually power to none. Now you can start playing with it and say, well, if it's an absolute true democracy, then they could end up electing a president or a mayor if it was a little town, a village. But you understand, they had to contribute to it. That the one person, the mayor, if a king was elected through a democratic process somewhere, if you give power to everybody, there is no power. You understand? Just in the crudest sense, what you have is the classic case of anarchy, which is not the point. The point I want you to try and follow is, if it's power to all, it's power to none. You can say that if power equals 100% and we had 100 people in the little town and we split up, then everybody's got 1% of power, right? Okay. But does anybody have any power? No. You're on the same footing as everyone else. So power to all is power to none. Now, and recall the three little things, because this may start to sound as though it's even making sense, God forbid. But we will stop that before the clock runs out. Stop that clock. All right. If you are going to think in some new way, whatever that means, do you understand you have got to have a central locale of absolute power? Just think about it from anybody's view. You don't have to take my view, if I had one. Or anybody's view, if you thought, yes, thinking new would be the X process, or thinking new would be a true Rotarian, or rotisserie, or Presbyterian, or whatever they call people nowadays. You would have to have a central locale. And ordinary people would even believe this. To go back to the most easily limbed example out here at Six Flags Over America, over the world. I mean, ordinary life. If you were going to be something, a Christian, a Jew, really be one, not fool around. If you're going to be one, you would have to have some focal point in your thinking. That is, you would have to be dedicated. It would have to have overriding authority on all of your little non-Christian, non-Muslim, non-rotisserarian views. You would have to have a sole center of power. The way this operates in life, though, does not result in there being power in one locale. What I'm referring to is actually the final, or would be the final operational reality of that age-old dream of an enlightened despot. Going back in the West, I guess as far at least as Plato, the idea that there could be an enlightened tyrant, the philosopher king, but he would have to be truly not only a wise philosopher, but he would have to be a king in the sense that he has got the power, if he's the smartest, if he is the most enlightened, to put his enlightened views into operation without having to put up with some kind of vote. The dream has never come to fruition. No one that, even in the ordinary world, that seems to pass for having walking around intelligence, even gives much credence to the idea. It's sort of counterbalanced by the other great idea that absolute power absolutely will spoil the kumquats, or however it goes. Even ordinary people out there in life have this less than particularly specific notion that anyone who ends up with absolute power, no matter how they start out, no matter what their intentions, they tend to end up being somewhat less of a philosopher, humanitarian, than the Platos and the Hobbes and the Schweitzers. Just something seems to happen, even if a guy seems to mean well. He says, hey, make me king, let me be tyrant, let me just take over for a while. We'll share power, we'll straighten all this out later, but right now things are kind of in a mess, and it's 6s and 7s. Let me take charge. All of you know me around here, what a great guy I am, tolerant, broad-minded, and I'll go, yeah, he is. Just let me take charge here and get things straightened out. They go, all right, why not? Go ahead and take charge. And it seems like the next afternoon he announces, it's me, your buddy, and now that I'm in charge, I'd like to say, anybody that's ever insulted me or doesn't like the way I cut my hair, and plus anybody that's on the street after 5 this afternoon will be shot. Thank you. Have a nice... It just seems to happen. So regardless of this great dream of there being an enlightened despot, the wise tyrant, which is just another form of God to ordinary thought, it does not seem to be on the political horizon for ordinary life. But if you're going to, in some way, think in a new place, you would have to, in a way that's not been analyzed before, you would actually have to have in operation what people believe is going on already, as I was trying to get you to see by examples of, if I were truly a good something, good Catholic, good Muslim, it would be a point that I was focused in my thinking, they might want to say in my spirit or something, but in my thinking, the rest of my life, the rest of my views, all run around the maypole of me being a blank. That I do have a center, a concentration of my own intellectual, spiritual energies that drive me to be a good Buddhist, a good communist. Gets very tricky if you think 3D wise. And so we'll stop that. Right? Ring that little bell, no more of that. Are you ready? A real revolutionist, New Thought could not share its mental authority. Now, running down a kind of neural Mobius strip, ordinary thought, if it is concentrated at all, would believe that it's capable of doing this, as witnessed by the kind of examples I gave, that if you are indeed determined to be a good something or other, something that's available, at least in name, in the ordinary world, that I am going to be a good Hindu, and that you study, you do whatever it is, and you change your diet, and you do this and that, and you try and think only Hinduian thoughts. So that anything that happens, if somebody comes up and says, would you like to buy, we just happened to be in the neighborhood and had some left over, we got an extra half gallon of kumquats. And you have to consider everything you do from the Hinduian point of view. You know, would a good Hindu eat kumquats? I don't know. Would a good Hindu buy kumquats from someone who's not a Hindu or from a stranger? Would a Hindu shop from his home? No. All of this. So ordinary thought could say, all right, I now have a soul, a central source of power, that I now only think from the view of what would a Baptist, what would a communist, what would a socialist do under these conditions. That I am now, give or take a little, but I am now more or less driven in my thinking that my strongest identifiable locale, the locus of my intellectual power is a place I can identify, where I attempt to be a Hindu or a communist, etc. But not hardly. A king cannot reign without foes in the ordinary world. All ordinary, apparent, satisfied seats of intellectual power perforce share their authority with all of the opposing views. That is the only way that it establishes what is the mirage of having some focal point in your thinking. Now, come on. Now, let's make it more interesting. Let's run back and remember I was going to give you 3 ways that things can mean what they mean times 5. Plus things can mean what they mean less, that means minus, what you think they mean, and they can also mean what you thought they meant, or even what they did mean before you turned them inside out in the Klein bottle. Remember, that's where we were before we got out on the Mobius freeway. All right, let's go back and look at it from the other view, that if we were indeed talking about what I am suggesting to you is not what ordinary men are talking about when they would say that, yes, I do have a focused view in my thinking, that I do have a central area of power, whether it was political views, economic, religious. Me saying that that's not so, not operationally. Then withal, back to where we're talking about what would be a new locale, let me point this out. If indeed you were thinking in a new place in here, it's not psychological, sociologically, spiritually, or spiritual, it certainly had nothing to do with your soul, it got to do with the movement, the activity, chemically and electrically, in your brain. If you were thinking in a new place that I am insisting would be beyond what we're describing, that ordinary people would think to be a place of a focused sense of power and one stabilizing, continual view that they have of life by which other things are judged And me saying that's not so, not operationally. If it were so, then here's what I would suggest would differentiate it. Is if it was a new seat of power, it was not power to all, it was power to somebody, something that was new. It would be in a place where there were, in here, no ordinary preferences, no polarized preferences, no explanations. And so in a sense it would be a place, are you ready, where it's all power. How do you like that for irony? That normally, many times that we're just, you and I, staying here talking, and it gets so convoluted. And so this time I tried to make it convoluted, and then tried to unconvolute it, and then spring it on you. And what do we get? Roughly, I would say about 2.5 gallons of irony. I'll take responsibility. Doesn't cost any more. All right, let's go back. We're talking about ordinary affairs. Everyone would follow this, would you not, symbolically? That if we were talking about a group of people, political situation externally, power to all is power to none. That is, there is no one, you got no king. You may have a democracy and there's no comment on the yeas and nays of political system. You understand you got no leader. And so then I was suggesting that if indeed you were going to think it was possible to move over some kind of focal point and start a new place from which you thought, you personally, it would have to be a place that this new thing would be indeed like Kyroots likes to talk about a king. At least any of you out there still think it has anything whatsoever to do without there. It would have to be a king. But we're talking about, not some phony baloney king. We're talking about a king. We're talking about a tyrant, a despot. We're talking about somebody absolutely in charge. So then you would have a place that you could say there is authority. So then I tried to come back under you and say, all right, it would have to be a place in here, if you're going to raise up and establish your own, finally, your own true enlightened tyrant. He'd have to be brand new, but wherever he was in here would be a place wherein was no ordinary polarized preferences or explanations for it to deal with. Comma. But what that would amount to would be, in this new place, it was all power. You understand? That was supposed to be the irony of, wait a minute, you can't do that. Except verbally. You're outside the three-dimensional and even the four-dimensional movements of electrical energy that passes for human thought. Because at this level, if you indeed could narrow it down and you've turned out one, but it's got to be brand new now, what are we talking about? And not just me pointing my finger. A brand new tyrant, a brand new source of intellectual power. If it could be established, he would be by himself. And therefore it would be synonymous, it would be operationally synonymous with saying once you had a new king, then everybody's got power. That the whole thing explodes on itself to start with, that if it's power to all, it's power to none. But if you can do it in a new place, power to one is power to all. You would have a new town meeting, you would have a new kingdom where therein there is no opposition. Maybe it's the time of year. Or maybe it's the year of time. Well, I've let Kyroots slip in enough, and I already slipped in it. But you do understand in the ordinary world, let's go back to that. And not just in the ordinary world, but even metaphorically. I'll let that even in. Because this is certainly not just politics, this is true at the ordinary operations of humanity. A king, truly metaphorically, a king cannot reign without foes. You cannot have somebody dancing forward, leading, unless somebody's prepared to dip. And whoever's prepared to dip, whether they know it or not, they're resisting because you're being pushed. And you're being pushed because in a three-dimensional world, all energy must be polarized or else it's grounded. It is impotent. So all energy is being opposed continually. If it was not opposed, it dies. If you do not have the opposition of your system attempting to exhale when you inhale and vice versa, then you're yesterday, we might as well lay you in a fish wrapper. You are bad news, and you're going to begin to stink up the room for the rest of us. There is the opposition. There can be no such thing as a king without opposition. Now, I know out in the ordinary world, ordinary intelligence would say, well, that seems to be true, but that is not the final statement of how things could be. Because if a tyrant was really sharp enough, if a tyrant really turned his mind to it, put forth enough effort, had the financial wherewithal, and etc., he could finally wipe out all opposition. Yes. Kill everybody. That's it. That is true politically. That is true out at street level in life, which is not even the point. That's not our interest. But I want you to understand it's true out there. And a few people, just ordinary people, if you push it that far verbally, they go, well, you could be right. And then you got to play this game like, well, I got to go because they can't. You know, what does it mean? It is operationally irrelevant in life. It's not going to happen. Nobody can try to make it happen. If there was a madman somewhere that took over a little kingdom somewhere, a group of people, and he decided, I am going to get it, I'll be the first, I'll be the greatest king that ever lived. For those of you that didn't like that Kyroot that was in tonight, you remember the guy that called the people out? And he said, I've decided I want to be the greatest king alive. And to fulfill this, to accomplish this, I'm sure you'll understand, I'm going to have most of you killed. You know, have a nice day. If a tyrant was going to absolutely take over, let's say he's got a little island so you can think about it, and he takes over, and he's already killed whoever was trying to also take over, so he gets in all of his henchmen, he bribes people, got in his family, and etc. But there's always rumblings of some kind. Was that my stomach? No, it was those people down the street. Well, I'll go kill them. So he keeps on. And then he decides, wait a minute, and he reads a little history, or he has somebody read it to him. And he finds out that all of his heroes, Azaric, Attila, Papa Joe, that none of them ever could just sit down and have a nice quiet meal, some cornbread and some greens, without them worrying about somebody taste this first. Or what was that noise? There was always somebody trying to bug them. I mean, they spent their whole life killing people, doing the right thing, and getting power. And you can't ever relax. It's always, you hear a noise. And you know what it is. It's not rats. It's somebody trying to take over. So he keeps killing and killing, and he gets down maybe, and he turns to his chief henchman one day and he says, things have been quiet, but I just know, I can smell this trouble. And he says, how many of my enemies? And he mentioned several of the parties, and they said, well, we killed all them last year. And he mentioned, well, how about this other group? Well, we killed them. Well, how about my in-laws that were trying? Well, we killed them. And so the king says, this tower on this little island, he says to his henchman, well, I don't feel easy. Who's left we could kill? And the henchman says, well, I didn't know how to tell you this, but me and you's the only one left on the island. And the king goes, huh. That's all you could do at that level. And so it does not happen unless some area within life's body, that is some group of people somewhere that life needed to extinct them, send them off to live with Elvis and the dinosaurs, because it'd be self-destruction. The point is, at the ordinary level, and it's not political, remember, it has to do with the nature of a 3D, and this will be different under other conditions, but since we're here, in a 3D reality, it's run by polarized energy. It's no discussion. You can argue it. Well, you got to see that by now. So, for any king to reign, for any power to be extant, for the lights to work, for you to work, for the cameras to work, for them to be able to sew up material, for the king to reign, that the king in this case, let's get a shirt. Hey, let's get together and go in the clothing business. Hey, let's get together and build a camera. Let's invent something. For a king to reign, for the idea to become supreme, an idea, a belief, whatever an ordinary person would call it, for the king to reign, he's got to have foes. Well, what are you going to do? You're on an island by yourself and you announce, I am King Big Boy. I'm King Horatio the First. What are you going to call that? We're talking about a guy out there on a little island like this and one little palm tree like the cartoon. No, he can strut, he can bluster, he can make speeches. No. What does it mean? Nothing. He is king of nothing. No king, no idea can reign unless it has foes. Literally. So now back. If you're going to think in a new place, it would be in a place that power would be concentrated. And the power would be concentrated in such terms as we use sometimes. It'd be in the place where you could think newly. It'd be in the place where you were engaged in revolutionary thought. It'd be in the place wherein you think more than you have to. And so in such a place, it would be that new, let's call it a new king, new series of ideas, a new viewpoint. But I'm talking about new, not just new to you, because new to you could be, back at the ordinary level, a person saying, well, wait, this does have application to me because I grew up being a Baptist, and through great personal sacrifice, not to mention some expenditure on narcotics, I have become an Episcopalian and I have a new view of life. No, you don't. It's new to you, but it's not new. You understand? We're talking about the new view you got is not a new view of anybody. It's not a new Kyroots view. It's not a new Hubert the First view. It's no view. It would be truly a new king. So here it is. And it's a kingdom that you didn't know existed. It didn't exist. It's a part of your brain that is now just kind of laying there going, you know, the chemical swamp is there. The lightning's flashing all around it, but it's just... And so you get it going. And this king comes up. It's a brand new you in there. Brand new I. Brand new little person. But it looks around and it's got no opposition. So, the little Kyroot could be fulfilled. Power to all would be power to none. But now here would be a brand new area because we got a king now of a brand new kingdom. And so he doesn't have to share power. It's not a point of, well, will I share power? Who's supporting me? To what degree are some of these? There is no other people. There are no foes. And so he would be, right, the supreme power. Except for this. If it is such a place, it's also that power is wall to wall. Power's with everybody. Yeah, but you said there wasn't anybody but him. Well, sue me. It's wall-to-wall carpet power everywhere. You can't have it both ways.
Yeah.
Oh, I was speaking for everyone else. You can't have it both ways. Well, all right, you got me. I'm sorry. Let's stop the tape. That's the danger when I start talking for sanity and ordinary people. Sometimes I say it myself and I suddenly hear it and I think, well, what is this crap? See, at least I didn't say shit. You know, now I see the error of our ways. And the waiter said, chaos, anyone? Yeah, but then you would have to have the wine steward step up behind him and say, is my name actually Stewart? What, are you sure that we're talking about chaos? Are you sure that chaos would be the correct name for this? All right, a good new neural spot of thinking would be a kind of place that would allow no competing power at all. But now, come on, folks, you got to admit, I warned you, we're running out of time. I can't keep backing up. I told you this was going to be weird. I think I used a more intelligent sounding word before, but now I can't remember what it was. It got so weird that listen. A new place could not tolerate, would not allow any competing power. But there is a difference between that and the way this would be taken as being quite possible at the ordinary level, as I've already tried to get you to see. If I described it in this manner to an ordinary intellect, it might say, well, wait a minute, you're pushing it too far, because now what you are describing, and they may have been listening to these shows and say, you've even done it yourself. You're not describing a fanatic. You've taken what an ordinary person, let's say, could become a good Catholic. They change over, convert to Catholicism, or they become a Baptist, or they become a a real passionate communist, a socialist. They want to share the wealth and spread justice and equality throughout the world. But now that would be a focal view, even though you said it didn't exist. I'm speaking for ordinary people now. Intelligence talking back to what I've said. But if they allowed no competing powers, no opposing views, they would not just be a king, not be just some ruling focal point of thought up here. They would have become a dangerous, intolerant fanatic, which becomes self-destructive. They are no longer trying to help people. You know, it's a good old story about I'm in favor of all free thoughts. I want to be king and I want everybody to be free. And somebody says, well, how about people that disagree with that believe we should be living under a tyranny? Well, kill them. And we just can't have it. You can't deal with that. There's nowhere else to go with it. It's like saying, well, whatever religion you are, we're just dealing not with religion or politics, but with the limitations of two-dimensional energy, which runs the three-dimensional world. You cannot have freedom and say, well, how about those who oppose freedom and want us to go back to the old dictatorship? Well, we're going to have to do away with those people. It's the same thing as, well, does God know everything? Yes. Well, how come he knew it? Some people. How come he lets these people say that they don't like him? Well, it's not the fault of man. It's not the fault of religion. It's not the fault of politics. It is the limitations, the physical, tangible limitations of polarized energy in a three-dimensional world. So ordinary thought, if you said it can brook no conflicting ideas, it cannot share the throne, then what you're describing is a fanatic, an idiot, an imbecile, just somebody's, no, I don't want to live next to them, do you? No. All right. And don't lend them money. And don't get around them if they get in power. Don't go back and say, hey, do you remember me? Forget it. But what is the difference then of me saying that if it was truly revolutionary thought, if you could think in a new place, this new place would not allow any conflicting power. What you would have in this new place, they would be speaking. This new king would be speaking in the language of causes. Whereas if you had some, even what appeared to be, a focal point at the ordinary old building side of thinking, it would still be speaking in the lingua franca of explanations. And to explain anything, there must be an opposing explanation, or else no explanation makes sense. You try to spit, and you got your choice. You either got no lips, or there is no up and down. You all follow that? There would be no socialist unless there were communists. And the socialist says, yes, I hate communists. Well, I know that, but you know, if you're going to spit, you got to have the wind. If you're going to rain, you got to have somebody to rain on. All right, if you're going to rain, you've got to have opponents. Surprising how people's humor begins to wear out toward the end of a real sticky program. Because remember, a man who can't take a joke can't take his lunch to work. Can't take a hint. Let's try it one more little way. Look at it this way. Back at the ordinary level, back at the ordinary neural building site and you and everyone else. But you can look at it personally. No one in here, no thought, no system of thought, no king, no idea. Even when it seems to be, if you recall what we were talking about last time, even if it seems to be relatively satisfying. You know, we were talking last time about how if you think at the ordinary rate, at the ordinary tempo, in the ordinary way, that is, just as much as you should, one way to tell is you're never satisfied with what you think, or if you do appear to be relatively satisfied, then you're disturbed that others do not agree with it, which was the alpha and omega. I knew I should have been a rabbi. Of how to determine if you're thinking only as much as you should. So now, I'm just referring that back into our present conversation, if indeed this is what it is, and your name indeed is Brutus, then even if you appear to be satisfied with what you're thinking, at the ordinary level, back at the old building site, you are perforce sharing the throne, though. If you say, I am satisfied with my view of whatever it is, it could be moral, economic, sexual, just having to do with social affairs amongst civilized men and women. Whatever it is, if you say, I am satisfied with this view on this one thing I have, that indeed I do have a non-fanatical, a personally developed and held view that I am satisfied with. I think a certain thought, or I have a kind of a system of thought about this one thing, and I must tell you, I am satisfied with it. It is stable, it's rational, it's defensible, I'm comfortable with it, I've worked it out, I've thought about it, blah, 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 blah. So you could say, I could say, well, so you take that as being sort of a king, or in this situation, or it's a stable, satisfying seat of power, seat of authority in this one area. And the person says yes. And if I said, well, you do understand that that seat of authority, let's call it the king metaphorically, the ruler of that one kingdom, that one area in your thinking. To be king, you can't have a half-brother. You can't have an anti-king. Right? There can only be one king. But that's not true. Because back at the old building site, that is where polarized energy is running the three-dimensional world, there is no such thing as unconditional, unbridled power. No matter, if you are satisfied, no matter that you thought, I do have a king in this one area, I do have a soul, stable, even satisfying, relatively speaking, seat of power regarding thought on this one subject. That stable, satisfying sense of power is sharing the throne. It is sharing the throne with everything that disagrees with it. You call that power? I refer you back to last time. How to tell if you're thinking just as much as you should. All right, what you think is unsatisfying. Now, we've been all through that last time, so that covers most people. Yeah, you're right. I'm not satisfied. I take other people's explanations, I study them, I try to come up with my own explanations, but it always gets down to those kind of ironic condoms. I think you mean something else. Yes. Well, you know, those hard things you try to pull over your head. It becomes, it's like saying, well, wait a minute, I fully believe I'm interested in affairs political, and so I believe that we should all be free to do whatever we want to. But then somebody comes up and says, well, how about the people who say we shouldn't be free, and what they want to do is find out if Papa Joe doesn't have some little Stalins left, and I'd like to bring them over here and put them in charge and, put some backbone in this country. Get a good tyrant in there. And they say, what do you think about that? And first what I want to say is, well, Jesus, we got to stop people like that. And so none of my thinking satisfies me, right? But what if you get to a person, not a fanatic, not some heretofore unidentified progeny of Papa Joe, but we find a person that's just relatively sane, and he says, well, in certain areas I do have a stable attitude I've developed, and I am satisfied with it. I am satisfied that we should have thus and thus form of government. You say, all right, how about those who say that we should have just the opposite form? Well, does that bother you at all? And the person does not have to go through, actual doing this. All you got to do is ask you. When you have an attitude that there seems to be a ruling view of some subject in your brain, and it sort of satisfies you, and you find out, as you already knew, but every time it comes to your attention that there are people, people who are walking around, some people actually in positions of authority, that there are people who just absolutely cannot see this. They just absolutely disagree with that. What does it do to you? It makes your little king begin to think he's wearing old woolen underwear. You get very itchy that, no. Can you be satisfied that there are people out there in the kingdom, there are operations inside of your own neural system, that say what you're thinking about that is not true, when it's just as plain as it can be? It satisfies you. You went through a lot of effort. You read a lot of books. You talked to a lot of damn people to get to it just suddenly came to you, and now you're going to tell me the rest of you can't see this? I'm not trying to win you over. Can't the rest of you see this? That's what's going on in here. That is thinking as much as you have to. That is healthy. That is why the world runs on explanations, not causes. That is why explanations are these cul-de-sacs that run into a circus. It's certainly a dead end, but you always come out of it. But it does not take you anywhere. The Wagner Expressway. If there was a new place that a person could think, if there was a place that you could establish, discover, find, ignite, from which you could think anew, but it's anew beyond any comparison. It's not to convert from one religion or one philosophy from another, but to actually think from a new position wherein there would be power with no opposition, and thus power that was not even concentrated, just wall-to-wall power. Consider this in closing, that this kind of power would have to operate, would have its authority not at the expense of, and thus not be dependent upon, any of the other authority, ideas that history and your own genetic memory provides. That's what makes it tricky, to say the least. That's what makes it a kind of ultimate improvisation. As a Kyroot, not many people seem to enjoy that one tonight, of a guy considering that noise would be music taken, stretched to its absolute limits. But then what might that say about chaotic thought? And you might have, I don't know, Joe Venuti or somewhere over here hollering, hey, wing it. New thought, a new king. Not just a new king, but a new king at a new kingdom. A new central source of intellectual power at a new place in the nervous system would have its authority not derived from, not at the expense of old thoughts. That is, you're not converted, you haven't changed your thinking, you haven't switched. The authority for it to be real power where there started, if there was such thing as real power of a new kind, it cannot be at the expense, and it cannot thus be dependent upon any other thought. It cannot be comparable. You are not in competition. I don't mean you with me, or you with the Baptists, or you with the Catholics, or you with the Communists. It's you in here. It is not a new king. It is not a true source of authority if it has its authority at the expense of any other idea. I joked about it, but by God, I think I did hear Joe Venuti say, hey, wing it. Those of you that are even older, it could have, of course, been Wingy Manon. Ask your grandparents to explain that, and then come tell me what it meant.